style provisions which have I think, are much more, have much higher economic costs in terms of the benefits that they provide. And finally, the reform of institutions. This is something that is mentioned in the Henry Review. It's also mentioned in the tax working group. Both propose that it would be a good idea to have entities, extra-governmental entities, that would periodically review the tax system and make recommendations. You might say a standing committee that would review tax systems. I think this is a very good idea. Of course, these things can always be, these groups can always be formed on an ad hoc basis, but sometimes it's hard to do that with the same kind of impact if it's not done by the government or with the cooperation of the government. And sometimes governments won't be in the mood to support such an exercise if, for example, the government is trying to pursue a policy that it knows is hard to defend. So it's good, I think, to have these sorts of things. This is, I think it relates to the evolution of institutions in other areas. For example, there's been a rise around the world in what are sometimes called fiscal policy councils. The United Kingdom has the Office of Budget Responsibility. Sweden has the Swedish Fiscal Council. These exist in other countries as well. The role of these councils is to assess the alignment of government policies. In particular, thinking back to the picture I showed you before of the divergence between revenues and expenditures in the projections for New Zealand, fiscal institutions, these kinds of fiscal institutions are there to say, look, this isn't going to work out, and some adjustment is needed, and it would be best to undertake adjustments along a particular trajectory. And in the same way that these institutions are there to bring problems to the attention of observers, I think the same thing is true of independent tax-related institutions. So I applaud that suggestion. I think it would be good. Of course, the details of how such committees are set up and what the problems might be are certainly a matter of concern, but I don't think that these issues should stand in the way of having such institutions. So what are the implications for New Zealand? Well, I think the tax working group did a fine job in its report, and I know that it was produced certainly without a lot of financial support or resources, and it undoubtedly accomplished its objectives of putting forward a number of useful recommendations of what might be done. At the same time, perhaps for another day, there are many issues that could have been considered that weren't, and that might change the analysis. So, as I mentioned, the issue of alignment that played such a central role in the tax working group's report might play less of a role if a capital gains tax were enacted. What kind of capital gains tax? I don't know. One would hope a better one than the ones that exist in countries like the United States, and there are some ideas of how to do that. There are things like wealth transfer taxes that New Zealand doesn't have that might be considered, particularly as an alternative to progressive income taxation or in addition to progressive income taxation. It might be more appealing to do that. These are the kinds of things that, environmental taxation, these are the kinds of things that are not so much omissions from the tax working group's report, but perhaps the subject for a different report in a different time, perhaps by a different group, thinking over the longer range, over the longer run, and trying to continue to push for improvements in New Zealand's tax system. So with that, I will stop, and if there are questions, I'd be happy to try to address them.